this smartphone show, a look at the gull-winged Nokia E70 QWERTY keyboard to candy bar all-in-one device. We look at Windows Mobile 5 based hardware from the last few months and a glimpse of what's going to be reviewed on upcoming shows. And finally we have a hands-on review of the Nokia N93, perhaps the ultimate multimedia smartphone. We'll see. This is the Nokia E70. At first glance a fairly traditional Series 60 smartphone, but this one's got a few tweaks which will endear itself to people using messaging, email and even word processing quite a bit, as you'll see from the form factor. If you look at it from the side, you can see these rather ugly side ears, but that's because it's a hinge. You fold the numeric keypad up and over and the whole display switches to landscape mode. And also, more importantly, you get a QWERTY keyboard. There's even a backlight for the keys which you can manually turn on and off. So, for example, you can go into the Office application folder and boot up a full word processor. This is Symbian's Word, reworked over the years from the Nokia communicator, etc., etc. But it certainly works pretty well on the Nokia E70, and there are various zoom views as well. So, for example, here's me typing away. This is a pretty good keyboard. In use, it's probably about the same speed as the Nokia E61, with which the E70 has a lot in common in terms of key size, key spacing, and the fact that you're going to be typing with two thumbs. Certainly makes a lot of sense for people who are using text input quite a bit for email, messaging and so on. This being Series 60 3rd edition, there are all sorts of tweaks for applications handling the transformation to landscape and for using different size screens. This is 352 by 416 pixels, which is a fair old pixel density for a 2.1 inch screen. So, for example, if we go into, let's take an application at random, clock, and then switch it into keyboard landscape mode, you can see that the clock switches with it. To take another example, let's perhaps go into messaging, having a look at our inbox. Again, switching back to portrait, you're in exactly the same place in the same program. It's simply switched the user interface. There is one downside to this switch from portrait to landscape mode, which I could demonstrate if I go into a third-party utility, Sys Explorer, which, apart from being a file manager, also shows me the amount of free RAM. That's the memory for running programs. Here it's showing us 14 megabytes of RAM free. Watch what happens if I switch it into landscape communicator mode. If I now press options and choose the same menu option, now down to 10 megabytes free. So there is a hit of around 4 to 6 megabytes switching between the two modes. I find it surprising that it needs an extra 4 megabytes to run the user interface in a way that doesn't actually involve any more pixels. Presumably it's something to do with the launching extra aspects of the interface, which can then be jettisoned later. But I find this a tiny bit distressing, and 4 megabytes of RAM, or 6 at worst case, is a lot to lose. Having said that, for most people I think the E70 will work quite well. But there's still plenty of RAM for running email, calendar, contacts, clock, documents, spreadsheet and so on, without getting into serious RAM trouble. Where you will hit trouble is if you start using the next generation browser, here shown as Web. This is Nokia's open source based browser, and it's very RAM hungry. It does a fabulous job of showing fully fledged websites as they were designed to be shown on desktop, but it uses up a lot of RAM in the process. And as with previous Symbian smartphones, if you're planning to use a really ambitious web browser, then most other programs will close down in the background and there's not much you can do about it. But apart from this, I think the E70's concept works well. I just wish they'd shipped a few more megabytes of RAM. Looking around the rest of the hardware, on the left is a voice recorder button. Press that and what the one press sets you into voice recorder with it recording, so that's all you need to do. You just start talking. This is a nice touch. You don't have to worry about which mode you're in, having started the program. On the bottom there's the now ubiquitous pop port for stereo music listening, although they only ship a mono headset in the box, which is rather a penny pinching measure, and you'll have to buy your own stereo headset if you want to listen to music. And a larger charging jack as opposed to the slimmer ones that have been shipped with recent E series and N series devices. The keypad itself is nicely finished, as are the keys in the landscape mode. There's a nice key travel considering the width of the keyboard. I think they've done a great job here, and there's even a row of numeric keys along the top, along with the backlight key I was showing earlier. On the right hand side of the device there's the infrared port. I'm glad infrared's now making a big comeback on Nokia for smartphones. And on the back, a camera. This is unusual because most of the E-series devices don't have a camera, presumably for security reasons within businesses. But this one does, and it's a great one. It's the same hardware and software, as far as I can tell, as the Nokia N70, which is the smartphone I've been raving about in the smartphone show for quite a while now. In terms of camera with fixed optics, this is about as good as cameras ever get. And this is again 2 megapixels with 352 by 288 pixel video recording, which is near enough VHS video quality. So great to have on board. The battery is interesting. I know talking about batteries is a bit of a geeky thing, but it's exactly the same plan view as the standard BL5Cs used in virtually every Nokia smartphone since time began. This is the 6C, and it's thicker, which means it's higher capacity. And interestingly, if you run out of power on this, you can simply swap in a BL5C from your wife's smartphone, and this will carry on going. So it's nice to have the 2 batteries compatible in 2 dimensions. What else is of note on the Nokia E70? It's a fairly standard Series 63rd edition application set. You know the drill by now. PIM apps, basic Office apps, a good selection of tools, including basic GPS functionality. Although if it was my smartphone, I'd be using something like Wayfinder or Navicore Personal as a proper voice-guided navigation system. In terms of media, you get the usual image display from your built-in camera, of course, or stuff you've loaded on, and RealPlay does a good job of displaying MPEG-4 videos, again on this fairly high resolution screen. It's crystal clear. Music player, again, will let you play WMA, MP3 and AAC music files, and there's a flash player as well. The E70 has all bases covered, with the combination of one-handed use as a traditional phone or two-handed use as a communicator. It's certainly a lot of things to a lot of people, and with a few minor reservations over the amount of RAM Nokia shipped in this device, I think it's a winner, and I'm very impressed by it. I should perhaps apologise to Windows Mobile 5 fans out there for the glut of Symbian and Nokia smartphones on the smartphone show of late, but there has been a lot of really quite sexy hardware to get through. But to put things slightly right, here's a brief roundup of the Windows Mobile 5 new handsets that released in the world in the last month or so, and starting from the next show we'll be starting to review them in more detail. Here we go. The Motorola Queue, designed perhaps to be a competitor to REM's BlackBerry, has a strange mix of design choices. It's overlarge in terms of plan dimensions and yet quite thin, which is one of Motorola's strong points. The keyboard, however, the keys are small, hard, rounded and very easy to slip off. It's hard to type on this thing. The screen's relatively small, the camera's only a megapixel. There's a lot that just doesn't stand out on this device. However, Motorola think a lot of the Queue, and so do some other people in the industry, and I'll be reviewing that fairly shortly, I hope. Oh yes, back to HTC made hardware now. This is HTC's Star Trek. What a great code name for a device, also seen as iMate's Smart Flip, etc, etc. Everything about this design is in the form factor, the clamshell. There aren't many Windows Mobile 5 clamshells, but this is certainly a good effort. It's fairly average in terms of specifications, 1.3 megapixel camera, but it's reasonably slim, very stylish, and it presents the non-touchscreen version of Windows Mobile 5 in a very palatable form factor. Oh, now this is my favourite of the new devices. This is HTC's Hermes, also known as their own Titan, TYTN. It's very similar to the old HTC Wizard concept with the slide-out QWERTY keyboard, except that this time the keys are closer together and larger. It's a much more cohesive feel to the keyboard. The function keys are now in line with the function keys on the screen,
specifications have been improved across the board. There's now a genuine 2 megapixel camera and a 524 megahertz CPU. This is one I'm definitely looking forward to getting my hands on. At first glance this looks like Palm's 700W, their smartphone for America, but in practice if you look at the top left there's no antenna. In actual fact this is their 750V, which is the Vodafone licensed version of the 700W for the European market. Very similar specifications, square 240 by 240 pixel screen, Windows Mobile 5, the usual trio goodness in terms of keyboard layout and keyboard optimization throughout. Again, very much looking forward to seeing this in the flesh. Yes, you'll remember if you've watched previous smartphone shows that I was quite fond of the orange SPV C600 candy bar Windows Mobile 5 smartphone. This is HTC's Meteor, very much the latest generation of that concept. Perhaps unremarkable in terms of specification. It's a standard 1.3 megapixel camera, standard size screen, standard WM5 applications, but I'm sure there are some tweaks under the hood, and again, perhaps in 2 or 3 shows time we'll be taking a look at the Meteor. Well, that's 5 new bits of hardware goodness to look forward to. As with all these HTC devices, do bear in mind they're going to be rebranded and redesignated by all the different operators around the world, so don't be too confused about the different names. Look for the recognisable form factors and the appearance.
Here I am booting up the Nokia N93, something of a hotly awaited multimedia smartphone. At first glance it's quite a chunky beast. If I compare it to the Nokia N90, which is another multimedia smartphone that's perhaps its spiritual successor, if you look at the two together you can see that the N93 is just 2 or 3 millimeters longer. It's also 2 or 3 millimeters thicker. And it's also, I would say, 2 or 3 millimeters wider. So given that the N90 was already perceived as something of a brick, this has to also be perceived the same way, even though it's got some nice curves and it does feel nice in the hand, but it's still a large smartphone. We'll start with the obvious. Right at the top you've got a fixed camera module, Carl Zeiss optics, 3x optical zoom, 3.2 megapixels. Solidly built into the main body of the device, unlike the N90 which had a swivelling camera, you may remember. You can also tell quite a bit about Nokia's pretensions for the Nokia N93 because there's a lens cap, like many standalone cameras, which flicks off rather abruptly, but it does protect the delicate glass of the camera module. And of course the lens is recessed anyway, and there are moving optics in there to keep protected. On the reverse of the camera there's a big shutter button and also a zoom in zoom out control, and we'll just run down these controls while we're there. While you're taking footage you can also use this small navigator on the side for navigating around the different menu options. It's fiddly but it does work. There's a dedicated button for switching between photo mode and video mode, and there's also a button for switching between the different flash modes and for turning on the LED as a torch, which I found very useful returning from a rock festival the other day. But on with the core functionality. Let's open up the N93 now. You can see it's a pretty large clamshell device. Now that's going to be large wrapped around your head, but it's primed at prime purposes, not as a phone or even as a smartphone. You buy the N93 because you're after the camera functions and specifically the video functions. Let's swivel the camera on its other axis, and you can now see it forms a traditional camcorder form factor. There's confirmation of what it's seeing, and you'll see from the top right of the screen that it's in video mode at the moment. If I press that middle button it switches to still photo mode, and at any point you can use the navigator to navigate down these icons on screen to set things like exposure value, contrast, although I don't really believe most people fiddle with these things. I think most people just point and go, and if you press options on the soft keys here, you can there are even more settings in terms of the file format you save into and its resolution. To take photographs, you simply press the red button, obviously. As with the N90, press it half down and a green flashing reticule appears on the centre of the display, and it stops flashing when the optics are focused, and then you press it the rest of the way to take the photo, and the system works pretty well in practice. Here photographing on a toy horse that's only about a foot away. Let's take another one. Again, watch that green reticule in the centre. Notice that after taking a photograph, the icons on the right hand side then show you what you can do with the photo you've just taken. I email it off, go to the gallery to see what the whole selection of photographs you've taken, print it to a compatible Bluetooth printer, go on to the next image immediately or delete it. Let's press the middle button to switch to video mode. You start videoing in exactly the same way by pressing the red button, and you're then off and shooting, and at the bottom of the screen you can see how many minutes of footage remain on your memory card. This uses up 20 megabytes per minute at 640 by 480 by 30 frames a second, so it's not insubstantial. Having taken a video, again you get a set of options of what you can do in terms of playing it back immediately or firing the video clip off by email or MMS, or although I have to say at 20 megabytes a minute you'll be loath to do this very often. Then there's gallery as before, and there's new video as before, and delete as before. In video mode, of course, there's no benefit from the autofocus. You're limited to a straightforward infinite focus, but the resolution's there and it's good enough for casual home use. I have to say though, if you're buying the N93 as a professional, hoping to take the place of a digital camcorder for taking out and about with you, you'll be disappointed. You'll never still get the same results from this as you do from a dedicated mini DV camcorder, not by a long chalk. Notice as you close the clamshell, by the way, there was that nice blue animation on the cover UI. The cover display is used for several things, showing the date and time, pressing the main shutter button to give you that. It's also used when you're playing music to show you a little graphic equalizer. There we go, showing the current track. And you can also change the volume using the side navigator. You can also acknowledge alarms and even change profiles by pressing the main power button, as you would on most Nokia smartphones. But let's open the N93 up and I'll show you around the hardware and the software. As I say, it's big for a clamshell, but it's big basically because of the amount they've packed in terms of hardware, and especially this bulky camera unit. On the left hand side you've got a plastic cover for the mini SD slot. That's a bit fiddly, but at least it makes it more robust and I guess splash proof. There's also a fiddly cover for the pop port, which I seem to have lost in my first day of use, and it's remained like this for a week, but I'm used to the pop port being exposed, so that's no problem, plus the charging jack. On the right hand side we've got the camera controls as already described, and on the end of the main phone cover we've got an infrared port. Again, it's good to see this. So opening up the N93, we can see it's a large but pretty standard Series 60 3rd edition clamshell. The keypad with the extra room and luxury of being a clamshell means that the keys are beautifully large, a nice key action, very easy to hit. There's a dedicated multimedia key as on many Series 60 3rd edition devices, giving you quick access to an extra 5 applications, even above and beyond the main active standby screen icons. And there are nice large function keys, although as with many clamshells they're quite a way away from the screen, which is a bit of an intuitive leap. Working my way around the applications, there's little to surprise you given the fact that this is say Symbian OS 9 Series 60 3rd edition. Gallery is perhaps a little quicker than on many N-series devices. You'll see it there how quickly it built the thumbnails. That was within a second or two. That same sequence would take 7 or 8 seconds at least on my N90. So I'm glad they finally optimised this. Within a video, as on the N90, I'm glad to see they've kept some nice simple edit functionality in terms of changing the soundtrack, chopping the beginning and end off, and also adding special effects like text. Don't go into their create movie system. It's horribly slow and horribly cheesy. For most purposes, cut is what you want, to chop off the bit you didn't want at the end, for example, and then joining different video clips together. The N93 ships with Quick Office, an office suite which provides just read-only viewers for Word, Sheet, PowerPoint documents, but you can see here I've added Office Suite, which gives you the full edit functionality, and this transforms the N93 into a bit of a workhorse in addition to its multimedia functionality. You can also see here there's a barcode icon. This is for scanning those new novel two-dimensional barcodes that you sometimes see on websites for quick entry of URLs into web. Web itself here is as I've mentioned before in this smartphone show, it's the next generation browser, and it's very RAM hungry, and that will become apparent in a moment when I give you a few of the downsides of the N93. So what's the verdict? How good is it as a camera? What are the negatives? What are the positives? We'll start with the camera. The stills camera is probably the best camera I've ever seen on a smartphone. That's not to say it's perfect. I find that the JPEG images it produces, in order to keep the file size down to a megabyte or so, are very heavily compressed. Having said that, the Carl Zeiss optics and the optical zoom means that the detail is there in the first place, and a bit of extra edge enhancement isn't going to go amiss anyway for most people's shots, so I'll let it off that one. The DVD recording, as in VGA recording at 30 frames a second, is also pretty spectacular. Again, you'll notice it's not as good as a dedicated camcorder, but being able to view this sort of video footage from your smartphone onto your home DVDs, or even better, direct to your TV. One of the cables that comes with the N93 is a TV out lead. It goes from the pop port to composite connectors and then into the side of your television, so that you can view your movies. Here I'm using the N93's landscape mode by twisting the screen in closed position. So for example, you could bring up movies in Real Player in this mode, watch them on the phone, and then think, oh, I want to show that to my family. You plug in the TV out lead into the composite connectors of your TV, start playing, and everything you see on the screen is replicated on your big TV screen, and this works very, very impressively. It's also quite cool, of course, to play games in this way. Nokia thoughtfully provided System Rush Evolution, one of their next generation's 3D accelerated games for the N93. I'll just give you a few seconds of this, and playing this over the TV out. Just select the craft, agree the rules, loading. And playing this game on a full-size TV screen is something of an experience, and shows that the N93 at heart has got the same sort of gaming power that you might find in a next-generation console like the Xbox. This is pretty impressive stuff. And you get sound and pictures transmitted through to the TV. You'll notice I mentioned negatives plural earlier on. I have to say that, as with the E70, I find that Nokia are penny pinching to some degree and not putting enough RAM in these devices. After the N93 is booted, it's got roughly 18 megabytes of RAM to play with. That's memory for running programs, and this just isn't enough. Why they can't, as on the N70, give it an extra 20 megabytes of RAM for the sake of an extra $1 or two, and then just know that you're never going to run out of RAM and programs aren't going to keep closing down. I think this is crazy. One final negative is that the N93 that we were loaned had quite a few firmware issues in terms of spontaneous resets and errors, but I've already confirmed the production N93s have a different ROM version to this anyway, and I very much expect these sort of issues to be sorted out in due course. But as ever, stay friends with your local Nokia service centre. You might well need them. So how does the N93 compare with, for example, the N90? Perhaps its spiritual predecessor in Nokia's smartphone range. It's bigger, slightly clunkier, but a much better camera. It's got Wi-Fi, It's got universal plug and play, all the benefits of S60 3rd edition in terms of cutting edge comms drivers. Not quite such a high range of third-party programs available yet. It's got the TV out, which is a great boon. The only real advantages the N90 has over the 93 are perhaps that it's slightly smaller and it's got a larger cover UI. On the N90 you can take photographs using the cover display without having to open the clamshell, and that's one thing you can't do with the N93. But I have to say that on balance the N93 does win, especially once they've fixed any of the first teething troubles and firmware issues. This is going to be the multimedia smartphone to beat. The N93.